Welcome back to another episode of the Bleav Georgia Tech podcast. We are your co-hosts. That is RJ Schaefer. This is Jackson Caldwell coming to you Thursday, May 9th in the afternoon with our weekly show. RJ, how you doing, man?
Hey, it's a great day, man. We both see that, you guys have been loving kind of the football talk recently, so, we're bringing more your way.
Hey, football is the most popular sport in America by a pretty good margin, and it doesn't take a genius to recognize that. And neither one of us are geniuses, me especially. So we appreciate all the love we've gotten. Just top of the show, I'll just take the regular housekeeping. If you're watching this on YouTube, we appreciate it. If you'd like the video, helps us out there. Subscribe to the channel. We try to make as much weekly Georgia Tech content as possible. We know we're getting into the dog days of the offseason. Baseball's winding down. The portal for football and basketball is closed up. We're definitely going to obviously talk about that. But we know we're getting into the kind of the dull part of the college sports calendar, if you can even call it that. So we appreciate that. If you're listening on podcast, we appreciate if you subscribe, follow us there, do all that good stuff. But now that that's out of the way, Damon Stoudamire was busy again yesterday, and he got somebody whose name you might recognize, Ryan Mutombo, son of Atlanta Hawks or former Atlanta Hawks player in NBA. I don't know if legend's too strong of a word, but very, very good NBA player, Dikembe Mutombo, one of the best defensive players of all time for sure. Famous for being on the Hawks, 76ers and all that. His son, Ryan Mutombo, who played at the Lovett School in Atlanta, he started his career at Georgetown, spent 3 years there. He is transferring to Georgia Tech, and he is a mountain of a man, 7'2", 260. I know a lot of Tech fans, and I've pointed it out as well, like this team's just lacked size for a long time. Like they've just lacked a reliable big man. We've talked about it on the shows. I'm still trying to judge how big of an impact he's going to make because, again, he didn't play a ton while at Georgetown. But again, he is by far the biggest presence that Tech has now. What were your thoughts on this when the news came out yesterday?
Yeah, I thought it was a really solid pickup because what you said, Ryan Mutombo is 7'2", and there hasn't been a guy like that at Tech for a long time. So I think he'll offer kind of the size and the length that we haven't had for a while at center. I'm not sure where he's going to fit in the lineup. I'm not sure whether he's, going to fight for a starting spot. Maybe be a guy that only plays the tip off. Like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how it's going to look.
Yeah, that's the thing. I didn't want to like over exaggerate it because I do think there's been a lot of, we got him. He's going to start plug and play center. I don't know if that's the case. I think there is definitely a path to get a ton of playing time. We're still waiting to hear what Brian Dongo is going to do. Waiting to hear what Miles Kelly is officially going to do. I haven't seen anything about either one of those guys. The NBA Combine is coming up. NBA Draft Lottery is on Sunday, to be exact, and then the draft is next month. So we're still kind of in wait and see mode with those guys to see if they come back. But he is the third member of the transfer portal class, joining Javian McCollum from Oklahoma, Luke O'Brien from Colorado, who me and you are both excited about. I don't think it's a bad take. Like, Ebenezer he didn't really do a ton last year. He went to the transfer portal, is now at James Madison. You had to replace somebody with size. I like taking a shot here. That's probably where I'm at. It's just let's take a shot.
Yeah, and he's kind of a guy who's, he was a really big recruit in high school, like almost top 100, just outside of that top 100 range. So the talent is definitely there. Maybe looking for a big rebound at Georgia Tech, and I think, well, no pun intended on the rebound. I think it's very plausible that, he can make a decent impact soon.
Yeah, that's what we got to hope for, and we're a ways away. Now there are still players in the portal that haven't committed anywhere, so we'll see how that goes. I don't really expect much else out of basketball the rest of the time, though, to be honest. But that might be a topic for a future episode. But you got anything else on Ryan joining the squad?
Not really. I just, kind of want to put out there that this is like one of the strongest classes in general for a very, very long time.
Very good portal class. And not just portal class, very good recruiting class. Like the additions coming in. That doesn't mean everything's going to click instantly right away, but I do think they're on the path to be better this year. But again, we're ways away from that. I'm going to have to do some more reevaluating of the roster and kind of look around the ACC as well, because like North Carolina's loaded up. Like they're going to be a very good team next year. I can tell you that. We haven't done a ton of baseball talk. I know that, but season is winding down. Leading up to last weekend, Tech had won, I think, 4 ACC series in a row. They had beaten Pitt, they had beaten Virginia Tech, Virginia, they beat Miami. Clemson was number 4. They lost 2 out of 3. They did get a pretty exciting 14-12, or is 14-12, 14-13 win in the doubleheader last Friday. Followed it up with a stinker on Tuesday. Like I don't want to like be too hyperbolic with it. Like I don't want to say their chances are doomed now, but like they took a hit losing to Auburn, who is not a good SEC team. Most of the SEC is a really good baseball conference. I don't include Auburn in that. They are not a very good SEC team. The pitching has just not been where it needs to be. They got 2 more ACC series left, and also a midweek matchup against Mercer. Duke, who they host this weekend for the final ACC home series, they are number 9 in the latest D1 baseball rankings, and Florida State is number 8, and they go to Tallahassee next week. Kind of what are you seeing right now? And like, I guess just looking at the projections, they're kind of a little bit all over the place. D1 has Georgia Tech in right now in their latest rankings, or their latest field of 64 projections this week. Had them going to Columbia, South Carolina to be in that region. I've seen a projection that has them going to Athens to be in Georgia's region. And then On 3 Sports and Baseball America have them both in the next 4 out. So I don't know. I think they're going to have to finish strong to kind of strengthen their position to get in. Maybe they have to win both series. I don't know if I'd go that far, but they're going to have to play well over these last 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think the realistic scenario is you're going to have to win at least one series, because I think if you go in and you take one game, even though those are good teams, you're kind of on the fringe right now of, you're a bubble team. Are you really going to be in? Are you going to be first 4 out? You're going to be next 4 out. But kind of looking back at the Auburn game, it's the pitching that has struggled like recently, and
Well, I don't want to let the bats off the hook now, because
true,
only scoring a couple runs through most of that game, and then that last game on Sunday against Clemson, the offense just no showed. Like the pitching, I agree, is still the biggest issue, but like you just can't combine it with cold bats as well. Outside of Drew Burress, who just continues to just break records.
Drew Burress might be the best baseball player in America.
Yeah, he could be. That there's a discussion to be had there, but he's had a phenomenal season. 21 home runs, I believe, is what he's up to now. Like it's just been crazy.
Yeah, and most people are gonna say that other kid from Athens, but
I was trying not to.
him.
Like I'm trying to keep my audience in here. Like I gotta appeal to somebody. But yeah, you go ahead.
But yeah, realistically, it's a lot of Tech fans are already ruling us out of the tournament. It's very realistic to be in the tournament, and I think the most realistic scenario is you go out and you take one series, and I think that's good enough to get you in, because your resume is already strong as is.
ACC is a freaking strong conference too in baseball.
Mm-hmm.
Like Clemson has an argument to be the best team in the country. I think North Carolina, I think, is a sleeper in the NCAA tournament with their pitching. Their pitching is really good. And then you can't rule out teams like Virginia, NC State, Duke, Florida State. Virginia Tech is still a pretty good team, I believe. But it's just losing 2 games to Auburn and getting swept by Boston College is just no bueno. Like you can't have that happen. And we'll see how much it affects their chances. But it's going to be an interesting couple weeks.
But yeah, the one thing we got to look for, though, is I guess there's no other way to put it. The pitching needs to get hot, and kind of if it doesn't, you put yourself in a place to where, okay, you're gonna need to take 3 out of the last 3 games, sweep a series against a top 10 team in baseball. So, kind of back up against the wall. Georgia Tech has been back up against the wall many times this season. So let's just see how they respond.
Yep. I mean, they were arguably the hottest team in the ACC in the month of April, winning those 4 straight series. Kind of got off to a bumpy start this month, but there's still time. Like there's still hope to get to the postseason, but we're gonna be a wait and see. We'll be back next week to talk about the series against Duke, and then obviously they've got a midweek game next week against Mercer. You cannot lose that game. you can They cannot afford to drop to Mercer because I think Mercer's RPI was lurking in the 80s, maybe the 90s. Like it's just not a very good baseball team. So you need to win that game right there. All right, enough baseball talk. We need to get back to football talk. So we hinted at it last week. We kind of wanted to do we talked about win totals last week, and we kind of wanted to give a look at the roster once the spring transfer portal window closed and kind of evaluate, okay, they did this pretty well. We still have concerns here because the rosters for pretty much every team are more or less set for the 2024 season. There are still some kids out there, even some kids I think that would be good additions to Georgia Tech. Maybe they get some, maybe they don't, but this is more or less the roster that you have right now. And we're just going to kind of go position by position. Obviously, we're not going to spend a ton of time on some certain positions. Like it's we all know how awesome Haynes King is. Like I don't know if we need to have a 30-minute discussion about that, but we're going to spend more time on some positions than others. But we just kind of wanted to give a big picture view of the roster, kind of talk about our concerns, where we think the team is strongest. Because it's only going to be a couple more months before fall camp's going to start, or fall summer camp, whatever you want to call it. And then we're about 3 months out from Florida State, so that's going to be exciting. But like I was just saying, let's start with quarterback. Most important position in football, maybe the most important position in sports, and Tech has arguably maybe the best quarterback in the ACC. That's a discussion we might have to have, but I don't have a lot to say here. Haynes King is going to be the starter. He needs to cut back on his interceptions and stay healthy. That's it. Like he stayed healthy last year, but just cut back on the interceptions. You have a really good backup in Zach Pyron. You have 2 talented freshmen. They didn't need to do anything in the portal here, and they didn't. So I think we're good to go here.
Yeah, and this is the position out of all positions at Georgia Tech where it feels like there's absolutely no rush because you have Haynes King and you have Zach Pyron. Any of the rookies, like they're not feeling rushed to be D1 ACC ready right now, and they don't have to be. So, there was not much work to do in the portal, and they didn't do it.
Yep. That's all I got to say. Running back is one we talked about. Obviously, I think we're both on the Jamal Haynes hype train for this upcoming season. I think he's excellent, and I don't think he's getting the respect he deserves. Like I see a lot of top 10 running back rankings or, all ACC projections that don't include him on it. I don't understand that. But again, that's a different discussion for a different day. I think he's going to be awesome this year. Just needs to stay healthy. I don't really have a lot to say about him other than that. We talked about after spring is, nobody really emerged as that number 2 back, whether it was Trey Cooley, Anthony Carey, Evan Dickens. Not that those guys aren't good, but just that nobody really emerged where you said, okay, he's clearly the number 2 back and who's going to come in and give Jamal some relief, when that time comes. There were some reports around Ohio State running back Dallin Hayden being contacted by Tech. He ended up going to Colorado. There was also something about Michigan State running back Jalen Berger, who started his career at Wisconsin, who's pretty solid back. He was reportedly contacted by Georgia Tech. Nothing's really come of that yet. So it did look like they might have been on the hunt in the portal for a number 2 back. That's a concern for, and it's not like a huge concern either because me and you both said take it into the fall and summer in the fall. Somebody just put it on somebody that they got to emerge, whether it's one of those 3 guys or somebody else. Got to have somebody emerge because it would be a concern to me if anybody got hurt, but Jamal Haynes especially, just because there's some uncertainty there.
Yeah, and running back is a position that, I kind of disagree with the general audience. Like, I think the running back position is probably one of the most deep on the entire roster. But I think it's still viable to go out there and look for a number 2 option. And, there are still transfers out there, so that it's still possible.
Mhm.
But yeah, this is another position where I thought if we didn't do anything, I think it'd be fine. Just kind of looking for who's going to step up. Could it be Anthony Carey? Could it be, any of the other guys that you mentioned? Just a very interesting position, but not one where I think a lot of work needed to be done.
Yeah, I agree with you there, and we'll just have to see. Like I think it's just going to be interesting to see, and it could be like a running back 2 by committee. Like you might see Trey Cooley get some carries one game. You might there's going to be some opportunities early in the season to maybe rotate some guys in there, but we'll see. And just piggybacking off your point, like you can never have too much talent at a position.
Yeah.
Like, look like, for example, like take a look at, and this is a very different example, but Ohio State quarterback room, they get a borderline 5-star quarterback in Aaron Nolan this past cycle. They bring in Kansas State transfer Will Howard. But once Nick Saban retired and they had a lot of roster shuffling going on, and the number 1 QB from this past cycle, Julian Sayin, jumps in the portal, Ohio State didn't sit there and say, well, we got enough quarterbacks here. No, they went out and got them. They didn't need them, but they went out and got them just because you can never have too much talent at any position. Like quarterback, running back, offensive line, like it doesn't matter. Like if there's a talented guy that you think fits on your roster and it makes sense, go get him at any position. Now, that doesn't necessarily apply to the receiver position because me and you talked about it. Like there was no need to go get another receiver. Like you have Eric Singleton, Malik Rutherford, Christian Leary. You have talented freshmen coming in. Leo Blackburn's coming back from injury. Like they're pretty set. And you have Abdul Janae and Avery Boyd as well. Like there wasn't really a need to go add another receiver. That wasn't like a clear cut like alpha. Like if there was somebody that jumped in the portal where he's like a future first round pick or something, and he was interested in coming to Georgia Tech, that's a scenario. But there wasn't really a guy like that in this receiver class and in this portal class. I think the receivers are really deep position. You have a lot of guys that can play, and it could be even better than last year with the addition with Blackburn coming back from injury. So that's all I really got to say there. We've talked about wide receiver a lot.
Yeah, and you even have guys like Chris Elko, spring game standout, by the way.
Bailey Stockton.
Literally everybody on the Georgia Tech roster at receiver can play and can play very well. I wasn't looking for them to do anything at receiver, even if it was like a guy who would come in and be wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2. Like we're set for a while.
That was just the only scenario where I thought it made sense. Like you weren't going to take a borderline guy that wasn't like, why use that roster position on somebody you don't even know if it's going to play? So it would have had to have been like a no doubter for sure. But that guy never really emerged. And I never saw or heard anything about Tech being interested in really any top receivers. So not a lot to say about that position, but that's a good thing for a segment like this. If we're brief on a position, that means like we're not worried about it. Tight end, I'm kind of in the middle on. I didn't really expect them to really add a big time player. Like they've added Rylan Goday, they added Jackson Halls. I think the kid's name is slipping my mind right now. They added the walk-on tight end from Michigan,
Josh Beatham.
Yeah, he's walking on here, so not a scholarship player, but somebody who he could like walk-ons can contribute to. So like you can't ever count that out. You obviously have Brett Seither here. Luke Harpering's coming in the spring. I think he could make a big impact. I didn't expect a big addition or anything, but I also I'm not like overjoyed about the position. And we talked about it. You might not need a first round talent at the position. You just need guys that can do different stuff, and they might have that. We just kind of don't know yet.
Yeah, and Beatham, the guy they brought in, we don't really know a whole lot much about him. Although being able to walk on in Michigan, like that's not something to graze by. Like that's pretty big feat, national champion. Also my second favorite team, so transfers from second favorite to first favorite is pretty cool.
Keep you safe. We only talk about favorites here.
But yeah, I think he did that, because I'm a Georgia Tech fan, but it's whatever.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we'll just kind of have to see how this plays out in the fall. Like it's kind of a hard position to talk about because not a lot of guys have a lot of career production, but you see we've seen some guys do some stuff. Then you've got a talented freshman like Luke Harpering coming in, who I think could challenge for playing time right away. We'll see. Offensive line, they did add Corey Pearson from Kentucky. They did go out and get him from the portal. Again, you're returning the majority of your snaps on the offensive line outside of Connor Scaglione at right guard. We've talked about Keelan Rutledge probably going to be the replacement there. He was injured all spring, didn't participate. So I still think he's on track there. Look, I really don't know what role Pearson's going to play. And I don't know if he's going to challenge for starting spot. He'll just be depth and for the future. But if you can add a guy like that, you always should. Like we said, add to your strengths as well. Again, we hope the depth is not tested because they had good injury luck with the offensive line, but I was not expecting any big additions to the offensive line just with the returning starters, and then they've recruited the position pretty heavily in high school as well.
Look, and I think O-line is the most solid position on this team, and I think what entices recruits is the ability of Georgia Tech to progress and train offensive linemen like a lot of other schools can't do. So I think that's enticing for recruits. But yeah, I'm just kind of interested to see how the depth shakes out because it's kind of a position where we know who most of the starters are going to be. We know how mostly it's going to play out. But in the event of an injury, how's it going to look?
Yeah, and that was Nick Pearson from Kentucky. I accidentally said Corey for some reason. That was Nick Pearson from Kentucky. So apologies there. But yeah, offensive line I still think is going to be a strength. Look, overall, offensively, look, they didn't really need to add a whole lot there. Look, if that like some stud became available that they couldn't turn down, like that, I'm sure that option's always there. But other than running back, I wasn't really expecting much in terms of offensive additions to the portal. And I still think it's a strong position, regardless of whether you add somebody or not. We just don't really know about the depth. We don't know much about the depth. We've seen glimpses of Trey Cooley in the past, and we both are high on Anthony Carey and Evan Dickens. So we'll have to see how that plays out in the fall. But anything else on offense?
Nope.
All right, let's go defensive line, which I think the position we're going to talk probably the most about. There have been some bodies added. Jordan Vanderberg from Penn State was a spring addition. Romello Height from USC also played at Auburn, was a big-time recruit coming out, played high school in Georgia. He was added to the defensive line. I still have questions there, especially defensive end. Like you still have Kevin Harris, you still have Sylvain Yondwin coming back from an injury. You have Josh Robinson. Micaiah Scott can play inside and out. So just the lack of proven pass rushers there. And obviously the run defense was very, very bad last year. But I at least think the interior, I would say, is probably the position you feel most optimistic about in terms of defensive line with Zeke, Horace Lockett there. You got Vandenberg there now as well. So there's some bodies to rotate there. But I think the season could be determined by how good the defensive line is overall and the pass rush especially because, there's just not a lot of proven players there.
Yeah, and the thing is we don't really know what's going to happen. Well, to be fair, I mean, there's still players who are in the portal that can come to Tech. But I just don't know if you have a lot of what I would call like very big impact players that could be there 100% of the game.
And there, just to make a quick comment on that, this spring portal was kind of underwhelming in a lot of aspects because I know there was a lot of hype about, there's going to be a ton of like starting caliber players. There's going to be a lot of big time players. There just wasn't a lot of that, in the portal this offseason. So it was you have to kind of trust your evaluations and guys you bring in. And I think Tech does deserve the benefit of the doubt there because they did a really good job hitting on some of these guys last offseason. So it is by far the number one question I've got on the roster going forward.
Yeah, and this is going to kind of be a test, for the new defensive coaches. It's going to be prove it. Like, here's your chance. Looking at a D-line who has struggled. But I think an outlook, onto this season is a lot better than it was last season. So, maybe you have a couple guys step up who we didn't even mention, and hopefully that's what happens and they prove us wrong.
And look, maybe the scheme and how
True.
Tyler Santucci and Jeff Simpson scheme things up, that could help out a ton as well. So I'm just kind of wait and see mode on the defensive line. I just don't know right now. And it could be the difference in them being a bowl team again, or maybe being something better. But anything else on the defensive line? Like, I know we probably both had a lot to say about it, but
Yeah, that's about it.
okay. Well, linebacker is a position they added to in the winter window. I guess what you can call it. We talked about EJ Light, seeing Jackson Hamilton already. Kyle Eford's there. Tajay Butler. Um, Look, your Trinilius Tatum is still there as well. You're hoping some guys can step up. Oh, just to mention real quick, I guess in terms of the edge rusher and pass rusher position, we didn't mention was Jacob Cruz. He had been talked about going over to the edge rusher position and not really playing like that traditional linebacker anymore. Look, I've liked him a lot since high school. He's very toolsy. He can do a lot. He's very athletic. We'll see if he can bring something to that position. But just talking about the linebackers made me think about him. I just wanted to mention him there for a second. I'm not like super concerned about the linebackers. I think he brought in additions that can make an impact, and then Kyle Eford really came on at the end of last year as well. So, you have any other thoughts? Like maybe contradict me?
Yeah, well, the only thing I really, had to say is this linebacker position is very deep because you have like your clear cut number one guy who I think is Efert, but you have a ton of other guys who can make an impact. And like I think Lightsey could be somebody who is an all ACC talent, and I think you have a lot of guys deep around that roster, and Jacob Cruz was one of those to where they can make an impact. So linebacker is probably the position on defense where I'm worried the least. Like I can put trust in the linebackers, any of the linebackers, any outside, inside, Mike, whatever. Versus, other positions you can kind of struggle with that. Like we talked about at D line, it's kind of hard to find guys that you can rely on. But linebacker, like there are guys upon guys that can make an impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably the position you feel most good about in the front seven.
Yeah.
I guess let's transition that to secondary because cornerback was one position that they definitely wanted to add a little bit. We've talked about Warren Burrell and Syed Gibbs already. They brought in from Tennessee and Rhode Island respectively. They added Zachary Tobe from Illinois. We both like that addition. He played a ton as a true freshman and was pretty solid in the Big Ten. So we'll see what kind of competition he brings and if he can challenge for a ton of playing time right away. But I at least think that's on the table. And then they added Jaden Davis from Cincinnati. He only was at Cincinnati for a year. He was just a recruit a couple years ago from the state of Georgia. So I think we both had concern about the depth at these positions, but Gibbs and Burrell have played a ton of football. Toad played a ton of football for only being a freshman in Illinois. So you already have Amari Harvey there as well. We talked about Omar Daniels being the nickel guy as well, and then you have Lamiles Brooks and Clayton Powell at safety. There's just unproven depth at safety. Like Jaden Davis, I like him. He hasn't played a ton. Tay Seymour, again, he got in a little bit last year, hasn't played a ton. So hopefully that those guys can stay healthy, but maybe those guys will be ready to step up. I think they at least have some bodies at the positions now. We'll just have to wait and see what kind of impact they made. But I at least like the guys they've added at corner so far.
Yeah, and when we talked about what we wish to see in the transfer portal, this is one of the positions where we got exactly what we wished for.
Mm-hmm.
Like they added a ton of depth, they added a ton of guys who can realistically challenge for a starting spot, maybe can play on the outside. Like Zachary Toe was a guy who did play a lot and he played at many positions. Like he was at nickel sometimes, he was outside.
Mm-hmm.
So just a lot of depth added and you know, really what we did want coming into the portal because there were a lot of questions like what is the depth going to look like? And now we have guys that are proven, guys that can be leaders, which is really what we needed. Um, so yeah, hopefully guys that can make an impact early. Like I think Tobe is probably one of the better transfers coming in because
Yeah.
he has already made an impact. So a lot of guys.
Yeah, and I'm still on the belief that Rodney Shelley's going to have a really good year there as well. And
Yeah,
I know the receivers during the post game press conference spring, they really praised Cedric Franklin, the freshman defensive back, as being somebody that caught their eye. So look, I feel a lot better about the secondary than the defensive line right now. But again, you have a new coach there in Corey Peoples. We'll see how he can, if he can improve them. Overall, defense just has to be better. I think you have some level of concern at every position. There's just unproven guys there. Like we don't know how the other corners outside of Amari Harvey are going to play, and he was pretty good last year. The depth behind Brooks and Powell Lee at safety is a concern, and then just look, you're talking about a defense that was run defense was horrendous. Like you're dead last in a lot of categories in the ACC there as well. And then, pass defense wasn't a ton better. So there's just a lot of questions to be answered there. But no additions were made on special teams, obviously. But shout out Gavin Stewart for going to Georgia Southern, closer to home for him. I don't know if you saw that yesterday, Gavin Stewart going to Georgia Southern. I was just kind of shouting him out. He did some good things at Georgia Tech. When Brent Key took over in 2022, hit some good kicks, was a really excellent kickoff specialist guy as well. So just hope he can find some success at Georgia Southern, my alma mater. Anything else we didn't cover? We covered everything, but anything else you want to add?
Well, I want to talk about Gavin Stewart for a second. We're kind of hoping that Aiden Burr can fit into that role because he was never really a kickoffs guy at all.
Yeah, and that's underrated, like we talked about in the spring. Like, if you're putting it in the end zone consistently, like you're just kickoff returns are a little rare, but Georgia Tech special teams have been a roller coaster for a little while now, and like you just don't want to give opponents another chance. So like having a good kickoff guy is kind of an underrated aspect of football.
Yeah, and it's not like the new NFL rules where touchbacks penalize you. Like in college football, touchbacks are very valuable, and that's just a guy that I hated to see leave, but I'm glad he's getting his opportunity.
Yeah,
as both a kickoff specialist and a kicker.
Yep, absolutely. So hopefully he can do some good things there. But that's going to wrap up our show today. I guess before we get out of here, I still think the overall roster is trending in the right direction.
Yeah.
I still think there's some positions that I still think are going to need to be addressed. And who knows, maybe there's some guys that can step up and be a lot better than maybe I'm giving them credit for right here. Along the defensive line, and I've just got to see the defense produce. Like I just can't buy into hype and hopefulness for the defense until I see something. Just because it was just very bad last year, and it's been bad for the past few seasons. So I'm just gonna have to really I'm gonna have to see it before I can believe in it. But offensively, I don't really have a bad thing to say about it at all. Like I hope somebody steps up at running back too. Like that's something I think that could be good. Maybe you get more of a pass catching threat at tight end. I'm just being real nitpicky right there. And then obviously the depth on the O-line. You have a lot of guys that haven't played a ton of football, so hopefully that doesn't have to be tested. But it's a question mark until it gets answered. So you got anything else before we wrap that up?
No, I do agree with what you said though. Like the roster is headed in a very good direction. Like there's no position this spring where I would say there was a downgrade or they didn't do enough. Like I'd say at every position and on every way, like offense, defense, special teams, I think every place besides special teams, I guess, improved.
It stayed the same.
Yeah.
Yep, but that's going to do it for us today. We will be back next week with more Georgia Tech stuff. Just to wrap it up, like always, if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Same for podcasts. Go check out allyellowjackets.com where you can find all the best Georgia Tech content there is. That's going to do it for us today. That is RJ Schaefer. I'm Jackson Caudill. We will see you next week, and thank you for tuning in.